I watched my sister Ella disconnect our father's life support. He'd been awake just hours before, asking for water. Comment below where you're watching from. Subscribe if you want to hear what happens next. My name is Tracy Soto, and I need to tell you about the most horrifying betrayal I've ever experienced. It involves my sister Ella Preston, our dying father, and a decision that haunts me every single day. 3 weeks ago, I got the call every daughter dreads. Dad had suffered a massive stroke and was in the ICU at Memorial Hospital. I dropped everything and drove 6 hours to get there, my hands shaking the entire way. When I arrived, Ella was already there, sitting beside his bed. She looked exhausted, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Dad was connected to machines, breathing through a ventilator, completely unresponsive. "The doctors don't think he's going to make it," she said without looking up. I pulled up a chair and took his hand. It felt so cold, so different from the strong hands that had taught me to ride a bike and fixed every broken toy I'd ever owned. For the next week, we took turns staying with him. Ella seemed to know all the medical terms, asking detailed questions about brain activity and recovery odds. She'd always been the smart one, the one who went to college while I stayed home to help with Dad's business. "Tracy, we need to talk about something difficult," she said one evening as we sat in the hospital cafeteria. I looked up from my untouched sandwich. "What do you mean?" "The doctors pulled me aside today. They said Dad's brain activity is minimal. Even if he wakes up, he'll likely have severe cognitive damage. He wouldn't want to live like that." My chest tightened. "But what if he gets better? What if the doctors are wrong?" Ella reached across the table and took my hand. "I know this is hard, but we need to consider a DNR. Do not resuscitate. If his heart stops or he needs more aggressive intervention, they'll let him go peacefully instead of prolonging his suffering." "I don't know, Ella. That feels like giving up on him." "It's not giving up. It's respecting his wishes. Remember when Mom was sick? He said he never wanted to be kept alive by machines if there was no hope." She was right. I did remember that conversation, though it felt like a lifetime ago. "The social worker said we both need to sign since we're his only family," Ella continued. "I've already signed, but they need your signature too." That night, I sat beside Dad's bed, watching his chest rise and fall with the ventilator. What would he want? What was the right thing to do? The next morning, with tears streaming down my face, I signed the DNR papers. "You're doing the right thing," Ella whispered, putting her arm around me. For 3 more days, nothing changed. Dad remained unconscious, and we maintained our vigil. Then, on Tuesday morning, something incredible happened. I was alone with him when his eyes fluttered open. "Dad?" I leaned forward, my heart pounding. His eyes focused on me, and I saw recognition there. Real recognition. "Tracy?" His voice was barely a whisper, but it was him. It was really him. I started crying and laughing at the same time. "Yes, it's me. You're awake." He squeezed my hand weakly. "Water?" I pressed the call button frantically, then gave him tiny sips from a straw. His swallow reflex was working. His mind was clear. This wasn't the vegetative state the doctors had predicted. When the nurses came running, they couldn't believe it. Dr. Martinez examined him thoroughly and shook his head in amazement. "This is remarkable. His cognitive function appears largely intact. We'll need to run more tests, but this is far beyond what we expected." I called Ella immediately, sobbing with joy into the phone. "He's awake! Ella, he's really awake and talking, and he knows who I am." There was a pause. That's wonderful news, Tracy." Something in her voice seemed off, but I was too excited to pay attention. She arrived an hour later, and I watched her face carefully as she approached Dad's bed. Instead of joy, I saw something that looked almost like disappointment. "Hello, Daddy," she said, forcing a smile. "Ella, my girl." Dad's voice was getting stronger. "Tracy says I've been asleep for a while." "Yes, you have, but you're better now." Over the next 2 days, Dad's improvement was remarkable. He was talking more, asking for real food, even joking with the nurses. The doctors were calling it a miracle recovery, but Ella seemed increasingly agitated. "The doctors say he might have some lasting effects," she told me privately. "Memory problems, maybe some motor function issues." "But look at him," I said. "He's doing amazing, better than anyone expected." "Tracy, you need to be realistic. This could just be temporary, a brief rally before things get worse." I didn't understand why she was being so pessimistic when Dad was clearly improving every day. That Thursday evening, I went home to shower and get some clean clothes, leaving Ella with Dad. I'd been wearing the same outfit for 2 days and desperately needed a break. When I returned to the hospital around 10 p.m., I found Ella in Dad's room alone. The lights were dimmed, and she was standing beside his bed with something in her hands. "What are you doing?" I asked. She spun around, startled, and I saw she was holding a syringe. "Oh, Tracy, you scared me. The nurse asked me to." She trailed off, looking flustered. I looked at Dad. He appeared to be sleeping, but something felt wrong. His breathing seemed different, more labored. "What's in the syringe, Ella?" It's pain medication." He was uncomfortable. But as I looked closer, I noticed the syringe wasn't connected to his IV line. And there was no nurse in sight. "Where's his nurse?" I asked. She stepped out for a moment. I walked over to Dad and gently shook his shoulder. "Dad?" He didn't respond. His breathing was shallow, much more shallow than it had been when I left. "Dad!" I said louder, panic rising in my voice. His eyes opened slightly, unfocused and glassy. This wasn't the alert, improving father I'd left just hours before. I looked at Ella, and in that moment, everything clicked into place. The DNR she'd been so insistent about, her disappointment when he woke up, her pessimism about his recovery. And now, this syringe. "What did you give him?" I demanded. "Tracy, you don't understand." "What did you give him?" I grabbed her arm. She pulled away, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before. Something cold and calculating. "He was suffering," she said quietly. "This is a mercy." "He wasn't suffering. He was getting better." I reached for the call button, but she grabbed my wrist. "Don't," she said. "It's too late anyway." The room started spinning. My own sister had tried to kill our father. "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. She looked at me with something that might have been pity. "The will, Tracy. Dad changed his will 2 years ago. If he dies while incompetent, everything goes to both of us equally. But if he recovers and lives longer, he might change it again. He might leave everything to that new girlfriend of his, or decide to give it all to charity like he's been talking about." I felt sick. "You wanted him to die for money?" "I wanted what's rightfully ours. What Mom would have wanted us to have." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. This woman who'd held my hand while I cried, who'd convinced me to sign that DNR, who I'd trusted completely. She'd been planning our father's murder. "You made me sign that DNR so that if this didn't work, they wouldn't try to save him," I realized. She didn't deny it. I pushed past her and pressed the call button repeatedly, then started shouting for help. Within seconds, nurses and doctors flooded the room. "She gave him something!" I pointed at Ella. "She has a syringe!" Dr. Martinez immediately began examining Dad, while nurses restrained Ella, who was now trying to leave. "What did you administer?" he asked her sharply. She remained silent. They found the syringe on the floor where she'd dropped it. While they worked to counteract whatever she'd given him, I called security and then the police. What would you have done in that moment? How do you process that level of betrayal from someone you love? The next few hours were a blur of police questions, medical procedures, and the horrible realization that I'd almost lost Dad twice. Once to his stroke, and once to my sister's greed. Dad survived. The doctors were able to reverse the effects of whatever Ella had given him. Some kind of sedative that could have stopped his breathing if she'd given him more. He made a full recovery and went home 3 weeks later. Ella was arrested and charged with attempted murder. During the investigation, they discovered she'd been researching untraceable ways to harm someone for months. She'd planned this from the moment Dad went into the hospital. She pleaded guilty and received 8 years in prison. At her sentencing, she looked at me and said, "I'm sorry you couldn't understand." I never spoke to her again. Dad lived for 2 more years after that, healthy and happy. He did change his will, leaving everything to a scholarship fund for underprivileged kids, just like Ella had feared. But you know what? I was proud of him for that choice. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if I hadn't come back to the hospital that night. If I hadn't seen her with that syringe. Dad would be gone, and I never would have known the truth. The sister I thought I knew never existed. The real Ella was someone who could look at our unconscious father and see dollar signs instead of the man who'd raised us with love and sacrifice. I still have nightmares about that night, about the look in her eyes when she realized I'd caught her, about how close she came to succeeding. But I also think about Dad's recovery, about the extra 2 years we had together, about the scholarship that will help kids for generations to come. Evil doesn't always win. Sometimes, just sometimes, you show up at exactly the right moment to stop it. Trust is a precious thing. Guard it carefully and never assume that blood makes someone family. Real family protects each other. Real family celebrates recovery, not mourns it. I learned that the hard way, but I learned it in time to save the person who mattered most. The days following Ella's arrest felt like living in someone else's nightmare. I sat beside Dad's hospital bed, watching his chest rise and fall, still processing what had happened. The nurses kept checking on us more frequently now, and I noticed how they looked at me, with a mixture of sympathy and wariness. After all, my sister had nearly committed murder right under their noses. Dad was still weak, drifting in and out of consciousness. The doctors assured me the effects of whatever Ella had given him would wear off completely. But seeing him so fragile made my stomach twist with guilt. I should have seen the signs earlier. I should have protected him better. "Tracy?" His voice was barely a whisper. I leaned forward, taking his hand. "I'm here, Dad." His eyes focused on me with effort. Where is Ella?" My throat tightened. "How do you tell your father that his daughter tried to kill him?" "She's not here right now." He squeezed my hand weakly. Something happened. I remember feeling scared. The memory was coming back to him. I could see it in his eyes. The confusion, the fear, the realization that something had gone terribly wrong. "Dad, you need to rest. We'll talk when you're stronger." But over the next few days, as his strength returned, the questions became harder to avoid. The police wanted to interview him. The doctors needed to know what he remembered, and I could see in his face that he was starting to piece together the truth. It was Detective Williams who finally told him everything. I sat in the corner of the hospital room, watching my father's face crumble as he learned what his own daughter had done. The betrayal, the greed, the cold calculation behind her actions. "She planned this?" he whispered. Detective Williams nodded grimly. "We found evidence going back months. Research on your medical condition. Inquiries about your will. She even looked into undetectable ways to cause harm." Dad closed his eyes. When he opened them again, tears were streaming down his cheeks. "My little girl." That broke my heart more than anything else. Even after everything she'd done, he still saw her as his little girl. The detective left us alone, and Dad turned to me. "Tracy, I need you to know something about the will." I shook my head. "Dad, that doesn't matter now." "It does matter, because she was right about one thing. I did change it 2 years ago, but not the way she thought." He reached for the bedside table with shaking hands, pulling out a small notebook he always carried. "I've been thinking about this for a long time, about what really matters, about the legacy I want to leave." I watched him flip through the pages, his handwriting shaky but determined. "After your mother died, I realized something. Money doesn't make people happy. It doesn't bring back the people you love, but it can help people who really need it." He found the page he was looking for and handed me the notebook. "I've been working with a lawyer, setting up a scholarship fund for kids who can't afford college. Kids like I used to be, before I got lucky." I stared at the notes, the calculations, the dreams written in my father's careful handwriting. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe more, all designated to help strangers get an education. "Ella knew about this?" I asked. He nodded sadly. "She tried to talk me out of it, said it wasn't fair to you girls. That family should come first. But Tracy, you have your own life, your own career. You don't need my money to be successful." I thought about Ella's words in the hospital room, how she'd talked about what was rightfully ours, how she'd convinced herself that murder was justified to protect an inheritance that Dad never intended us to have anyway. "She killed for money that was never going to be hers," I said quietly. "She tried to kill for it," Dad corrected. "Thanks to you, she didn't succeed." But something was still bothering me. Something about the timeline, about how perfectly everything had aligned. I pulled out my phone and started scrolling through my messages with Ella from the past few weeks. That's when I saw it. The message she'd sent me the day before Dad's stroke. "Visiting Dad tomorrow. Wanna come?" I'd been busy with work and had declined. But what if that wasn't a coincidence? What if she'd known something was going to happen? "Dad, the morning you had your stroke, was Ella there?" He thought for a moment. "Yes, she came by early. Brought me breakfast." "Why?" My blood ran cold. "What kind of breakfast?" "Coffee and those pastries I like, from that bakery downtown. She was being so sweet, fussing over me like your mother used to." I felt sick. Had she given him something that morning? Something to trigger the stroke, or make it worse? I called Detective Williams immediately. Within an hour, he was back at the hospital with more questions. They tested Dad's blood again, looking for any traces of medications or substances that shouldn't have been there. They examined his medical records from the day of the stroke, looking for anything unusual. What they found changed everything. Dad's stroke hadn't been entirely natural. There were traces of a medication in his system, something that could cause blood clots in someone his age, especially someone with his medical history. The levels were low enough that the emergency room doctors had missed it initially, assuming it was something he'd been prescribed. But Dad wasn't taking any medication like that. She didn't just try to finish him off in the hospital, Detective Williams explained to me privately. She caused the stroke in the first place. The scope of Ella's crime was so much bigger than we'd realized, She hadn't just seized an opportunity when Dad got sick. She'd created the opportunity. She'd poisoned our father, put him in the hospital, convinced me to sign a DNR, and then tried to finish what she'd started when he began to recover. How long had she been planning this? How many times had she visited him, bringing him food or drinks, slowly poisoning him? How many family dinners had she sat through, smiling and laughing, while secretly plotting his death? When I told Dad what they'd discovered, something changed in his eyes. The heartbreak was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Anger. Disappointment so deep, it seemed to age him years in that moment. "My own daughter," he whispered. "How did I raise someone capable of this?" "You didn't raise her to be this way," I said firmly. "You raised her to be loving and kind. What she became, that's on her, not you." But I could see the guilt eating at him. Every parent's worst nightmare, discovering that the child you loved and sacrificed for has become someone you don't recognize. The additional charges were filed within days. Attempted murder became attempted murder, plus assault with a deadly weapon. The poisoning added years to her potential sentence. Her lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the prosecutor wasn't interested in being lenient. During one of the court hearings, I saw Ella for the first time since her arrest. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. When our eyes met across the courtroom, she mouthed the word, "sorry." But sorry doesn't bring back the trust. Sorry doesn't erase the months of planning and plotting. Sorry doesn't undo the slow poisoning of our father or the attempt to smother him in his hospital bed. After the hearing, her lawyer approached me in the hallway. "She wants to see you," he said. "She says she has things she needs to explain." I stared at him. What could she possibly have to explain? "She says there's more to the story. Things you don't understand about your family's finances, about why she felt she had no choice." Part of me was curious. Part of me wanted to hear what twisted justification she'd created for her actions. But the bigger part of me knew that nothing she could say would make this right. "Tell her no," I said. "Tell her I never want to see her again." Because that was the truth. The sister I'd loved and trusted was gone. Maybe she'd never existed at all. In her place was a stranger who'd proven that blood meant nothing when greed was involved. What would you do? If someone you'd trusted your whole life betrayed you in the worst possible way, could you ever forgive them? Could you ever feel safe around them again? Dad was discharged from the hospital 2 weeks later. He'd made a remarkable recovery, considering everything he'd been through. The doctors said he was lucky. If I hadn't caught Ella when I did, if they hadn't been able to reverse the effects of what she'd given him, he might not have survived the night. We didn't talk much about Ella during those first weeks at home. But I could see the sadness in Dad's eyes whenever he looked at family photos or when someone mentioned her name. He'd lost a daughter, and I'd lost a sister. Even though she was still alive, still in the world somewhere, she was dead to us now. The trial was set for 6 months later. Until then, we had to learn how to live with what had happened, how to trust again, how to move forward when someone you loved had proven capable of the unthinkable. But we would survive this. Dad and I, we would find a way to heal. Because that's what real family does. They protect each other, support each other, and never give up hope. The scholarship fund was established 3 months after Dad came home. He threw himself into the project with renewed energy, as if helping others helped him process his own pain. We named it the Sarah Soto Memorial Scholarship after my mother. She would have loved knowing that her husband's money was going to help kids achieve their dreams. Ella would serve her time, justice would be done, and life, somehow, would go on. But I would never forget the lesson she'd taught me. Sometimes the people who seem closest to you are the ones capable of the greatest betrayal. Trust carefully, love deeply, but always, always protect yourself and the people who truly matter. Because you never know who might be planning to destroy everything you hold dear. The scholarship fund was more than just Dad's way of healing. It became his obsession. Every morning, I'd find him at the kitchen table with stacks of applications, reading each one carefully, making notes in his precise handwriting. He'd interview potential recipients over video calls, asking about their dreams, their struggles, their plans for the future. "This one," he'd say, sliding an application across the table to me. "Single mother, working 2 jobs, straight A's in nursing school. This is exactly what your mother would have wanted." I watched him pour his heart into these strangers' lives, and I understood. Helping them helped him forget, even for a moment, that his own daughter had tried to kill him for money, that the child he'd raised and loved had seen him as nothing more than an obstacle to her inheritance. But there were moments when the pain broke through. I'd catch him staring at Ella's old bedroom, or holding one of the family photos where she was smiling between us. Those moments broke my heart more than anything else. 3 weeks after Dad came home, I was cleaning out the guest room where Ella used to stay when she visited. I'd been putting it off, not wanting to deal with the memories attached to every item. But Dad was having trouble sleeping, and the guest room got better morning light. I thought maybe a change of scenery would help. I started with the dresser drawers. Most of it was just old clothes and personal items. But in the bottom drawer, tucked behind some sweaters, I found a manila folder. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were bank statements. Not Dad's statements, accounts I'd never seen before. Accounts with Ella's name on them, but also other names I didn't recognize. The amounts were staggering. Hundreds of thousands of dollars moving in and out of these accounts over the past 2 years. Money being transferred from what looked like investment accounts, real estate sales, even some kind of business partnership. Where had all this money come from? And why had Ella hidden these statements here? I kept digging through the folder. There were contracts, legal documents, correspondence with lawyers I'd never heard of. One letter, dated just 6 months ago, made my blood run cold. It was from a law firm in Chicago, addressed to Ella. The subject line read, "Estate Planning and Asset Protection Services." The letter talked about protecting assets from potential creditors and establishing offshore accounts for privacy purposes. It mentioned something called a testamentary trust that would ensure smooth transfer of assets upon the benefactor's death. They weren't just talking about Dad's money. They were talking about Ella's money. Money she already had. Money she'd been hiding. But if Ella already had access to this much wealth, why would she need Dad's inheritance? Why risk everything for money she apparently didn't even need? I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the documents, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The bank statements showed regular large deposits, $50,000 here, $75,000 there, all within the past 18 months. One deposit caught my attention. It was for $230,000, dated exactly 1 year ago. The memo line read, "Property sale, 1247 Riverside Drive." I knew that address. That was Grandma's old house. The house that had been sitting empty since she died 3 years ago. The house that Dad had been meaning to sell but never got around to because it held too many memories. But according to this statement, someone had already sold it. Someone had pocketed nearly $250,000 from the sale of our grandmother's house. My phone was in my hand before I fully realized what I was doing. I called Dad's lawyer, Mr. Richardson, the man who'd been handling our family's legal affairs for over 20 years. "Tracy," he said when he picked up, "how's your father doing?" Mr. Richardson, I need to ask you about Grandma's house on Riverside Drive. Has that property been sold? There was a pause. Well, yes, about a year ago, I believe. Your sister handled all the paperwork. She said your father had asked her to take care of it since he wasn't feeling up to dealing with the emotional aspects of selling his mother's home. The room started spinning. She said Dad asked her to handle it? That's right. She had all the proper documentation, power of attorney forms. Everything was in order. The sale went through without any issues. I assumed you knew about it. How much did it sell for? I believe it was around $240,000 after closing costs and fees. Your sister said she'd deposited the money into your father's account. Has there been some kind of problem? I closed my eyes. Mr. Richardson, I need you to check something for me. Can you look at Dad's bank records and see if that money was ever deposited? Of course. Hold on just a moment. The silence stretched on forever. Finally, he came back on the line. Tracy, I'm not seeing any deposit of that amount in your father's primary accounts. Are you sure there isn't a separate account where the funds might have been placed? I'm sure, I whispered. Mr. Richardson, I think we have a problem. After I hung up, I sat staring at the documents spread across the bed. Ella hadn't just been planning to kill Dad for his inheritance. She'd been stealing from him for over a year. The house sale was just the beginning. I thought about all the times she'd offered to help Dad with his finances. All the times she'd volunteered to handle paperwork or meet with his accountant. All the times she'd said she was just trying to make things easier for him. She'd been systematically robbing him blind. But there was something else bothering me. Something that didn't make sense. If Ella had been stealing money from Dad for months, if she already had access to hundreds of thousands of dollars, why try to kill him at all? Why not just keep taking what she could and hope he never noticed, unless there was something else, something bigger that she needed him gone to access? I picked up my phone again and called Detective Williams. I found something, I told him. I think the poisoning and the attempted murder might have just been part of a much bigger scheme. What kind of scheme? I think she's been embezzling from him for over a year. I found bank statements, legal documents, evidence of property sales that Dad never authorized. Detective Williams, I think she needed him dead, not just for the inheritance, but to cover up what she'd already stolen. Can you bring those documents to the station? I'll be there in an hour. As I gathered up the papers, my mind raced through the implications. If Ella had been stealing from Dad for this long, what else had she taken? What other properties or assets had she sold without his knowledge? How deep did this betrayal go? But more importantly, if she was willing to kill to cover up her theft, what would she do when she found out I'd discovered her secret? I thought about the lawyer's message, about Ella wanting to see me, claiming there were things I didn't understand. Had she somehow known I would find these documents? Was this all part of some larger plan? My hands shook as I locked the house behind me. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wondered if Ella's arrest had really ended the danger, or if it had only just begun. Because if there was one thing I'd learned about my sister, it was that she was always 3 steps ahead of everyone else, and people desperate enough to commit murder once were capable of trying again. The drive to the police station felt like the longest 20 minutes of my life. Every car that pulled up beside me at a red light made me nervous. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Was I being paranoid? Or was I finally learning to protect myself from someone who'd proven she would stop at nothing to get what she wanted? I guess I was about to find out. At the police station, Detective Williams spread the documents across his desk, his expression growing darker with each page he examined. "This is extensive," he said finally. "Your sister wasn't just stealing. She was running a sophisticated fraud operation. But Tracy, there's something I need to tell you. We got a call from the prison this morning." My heart stopped. "What kind of call?" "Ella's been asking to see you. She says there are things about your father's condition that you don't understand. Things that could change everything." I stared at him. What could she possibly have to say that would matter now? "I don't know, but she's been insistent. Says she has information that could help your father's recovery." He paused. "She also mentioned something about medical records that might explain why he's been having memory issues." Memory issues. Dad had been confused lately, forgetting conversations we'd had just hours before. The doctors said it was stress from the poisoning, but what if there was more to it? "I want to see those medical records first," I said. Detective Williams nodded. "I can arrange that. Your father's doctor has been cooperative with the investigation." An hour later, I sat in Dr. Martinez's office, staring at a file that made my blood run cold. "Your father has been showing signs of early-stage dementia for the past 2 years," Dr. Martinez explained gently. "The progression has been gradual, but it's definitely there. Short-term memory loss, confusion about recent events, difficulty making complex decisions." 2 years? My voice cracked. Why wasn't I told? "According to our records, his emergency contact and medical power of attorney is listed as Ella Preston. She requested that his diagnosis be kept confidential to protect his dignity. She said the family would handle it privately." The room tilted. "She's had medical power of attorney for 2 years?" "Yes. She presented all the proper documentation. Your father signed everything in the presence of a notary." Dr. Martinez pulled out another file. "She's been making medical decisions for him for quite some time." I thought about all those doctor's appointments Ella had insisted on driving him to. All the times she'd said she wanted to help him stay organized with his medications. All the conversations where she'd gently suggested that Dad was getting forgetful and maybe shouldn't be handling his own affairs. She hadn't been helping him. She'd been documenting his decline, building a case for why she needed legal control over his life. "Doctor, the power of attorney documents, can I see them?" He hesitated. "Well, given the current legal situation with Ms. Preston's arrest, I suppose that would be appropriate." When he handed me the file, my hands were already shaking. But nothing could have prepared me for what I found inside. The signature on the power of attorney documents wasn't Dad's. I'd seen his handwriting thousands of times. Birthday cards, grocery lists, notes on my report cards. This signature was close, but the loops were wrong. The slant was different. Someone had practiced it, gotten good at it, but it wasn't his. "Dr. Martinez," I said slowly, "when exactly did my father sign these documents?" "Let me check." He flipped through the papers. "March 15th, 2 years ago. It was right after his initial diagnosis. Ms. Preston said he wanted to get his affairs in order while he was still mentally competent." March 15th. I knew that date. That was the day Dad had been in the hospital with pneumonia. He'd been sedated for most of the week, barely conscious. There was no way he could have signed anything. But there was something else. Something that made my stomach turn. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through old photos until I found what I was looking for. A picture from Dad's birthday that year, just 2 months after the supposed signing. In the photo, Dad was laughing, alert, completely himself. His speech at dinner had been sharp and funny. He'd told stories about his childhood with perfect clarity. There had been no signs of dementia then. No confusion, no memory loss. He'd been fine. "Doctor, you said Dad's been showing signs of dementia for 2 years, but what if he hadn't been diagnosed 2 years ago? What if someone had been helping those symptoms along?" Dr. Martinez frowned. What do you mean? What if someone had been giving him something? Something that would cause confusion, memory problems, make him seem like he was developing dementia? The color drained from the doctor's face. Are you suggesting he was being drugged? I'm saying that my sister forged his signature on these documents. She's been controlling his medical care for 2 years based on a false diagnosis. And now I'm wondering if she created the symptoms that led to that diagnosis in the first place. Dr. Martinez was quiet for a long moment. We would need to run specific tests. Look for traces of certain medications or substances that could mimic dementia symptoms. But Tracy, if what you're suggesting is true, then she's been poisoning him for 2 years. Not to kill him quickly, but slowly. To make him seem incompetent so she could take control of everything he owned. I thought about all those times Ella had brought Dad his morning coffee. How she'd started coming over every day, saying she was worried about him living alone. How she'd gradually convinced him to let her handle more and more of his affairs. She hadn't been caring for him. She'd been systematically destroying his mind while stealing his life. There's more, I whispered, pulling out the bank statements. She's been selling his property, accessing his accounts, stealing hundreds of thousands of dollars, all while making him think he was losing his mind. The scope of it hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about money or inheritance. Ella had been torturing our father for 2 years, making him doubt his own sanity while she robbed him blind. And when the slow poisoning wasn't enough, when he started showing signs of recovery in the hospital, she'd tried to finish the job with something stronger. Doctor, I need you to run every test you can think of. I need to know what she's been giving him and for how long. Of course. But Tracy, if these allegations are true, this goes far beyond what we initially thought. We're talking about years of systematic abuse. I stood up, my legs unsteady. I need to call Detective Williams. And then I need to see my father. Wait, Dr. Martinez said. There's something else, something I should have mentioned earlier. Your sister has been requesting access to your father's room. She's been calling repeatedly, saying she needs to speak with him about important family matters. Ice ran through my veins. You haven't let her see him, have you? No, of course not. Given her arrest, we've denied all requests, but she's been persistent, almost desperate. Desperate. Because she knew that if Dad recovered fully, if his mind cleared completely, he'd remember things. He'd realize what she'd been doing to him. He might even remember signing documents he never actually signed, or not signing documents that bore his forged signature. She needed him dead not just for the money, but to protect herself from the truth coming out. My phone rang. Detective Williams. Tracy, where are you? We need to talk immediately. We just got word from the prison. Ella Preston has been moved to the medical wing. What happened? She collapsed in her cell this morning. They think she might have ingested something. Tracy, they found a note in her cell. It mentioned you and your father. We need you to come in right now. The room started spinning. Even from prison, Ella was still manipulating the situation, still trying to control the narrative. I'm on my way, I said. But Detective Williams, you need to know something. This goes back years. She's been poisoning Dad slowly, making him seem mentally incompetent while she stole everything he owned. The attempted murder in the hospital wasn't the beginning. It was supposed to be the end. Jesus, how long do you think this has been going on? I looked at the forged documents in my hands. Thought about all those mornings Ella had brought Dad coffee. All those times she'd convinced him he was forgetting things that had never actually happened. At least 2 years, maybe longer. Detective Williams, my sister didn't just try to kill our father. She's been slowly destroying his mind while she robbed him of everything he worked his entire life to build. Get down here now. We need to document everything you found. And Tracy? Be careful. If she's desperate enough to hurt herself in prison, there's no telling what else she might have planned. As I hung up, I realized the most terrifying part of all this wasn't what Ella had already done. It was the fact that even behind bars, even facing murder charges, she was still trying to manipulate the situation. The note mentioning me and Dad, the sudden medical emergency, the desperate requests to see him. What if this was all part of some larger plan? What if Ella had one more card to play? I thought about Dad, lying in his hospital bed, his mind slowly clearing from years of chemical fog. He was vulnerable, he was trusting, and he had no idea that the daughter he'd loved and protected had been systematically destroying him for years. I had to get to him. I had to make sure he was safe. Because if Ella had taught me anything, it was that she was always thinking 3 steps ahead. And I was terrified to find out what her final move might be. I rushed to the police station, my mind racing with questions about Ella's mysterious note and sudden medical emergency. Detective Williams met me at the front desk, his expression grim. "Before we talk about the note, I need to show you something," he said, leading me to a small conference room. "We've been analyzing your sister's financial records more thoroughly." He spread out documents across the table. Bank statements, wire transfers, property deeds. The scope was overwhelming. "Tracy, we found something that changes everything we thought we knew about this case." My heart pounded as I looked at the papers. "What kind of something?" Detective Williams pulled out a folder marked with my father's name. "We traced the money trail back further than we initially thought. And what we found?" He paused, studying my face. "Your father's accounts show regular large withdrawals going back 5 years. Not 2 years like we originally believed." 5 years? I whispered. But Dad was completely healthy 5 years ago. Sharp as ever. That's what we thought too, until we dug deeper. He opened another file. "Tracy, these withdrawals weren't random. They were systematic, scheduled, and they all went to the same place." He showed me a series of bank transfers. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, moving from Dad's accounts to a medical facility I'd never heard of. "Sunrise Memory Care Center," Detective Williams said quietly. "Ever heard of it?" I shook my head, confusion growing. "No, Dad's never been to any memory care facility. He was living independently until just recently." "That's what we thought. But according to their records, your father has been a patient there for the past 5 years, full-time residential care, paying premium rates for specialized dementia treatment." The room started spinning. "That's impossible. I've seen Dad regularly. He's been living in his house. Ella and I both visit him there." Detective Williams was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out a photograph. It was Dad. But not Dad. An older man who looked exactly like him, sitting in a wheelchair in what appeared to be a care facility. The timestamp showed it was taken just 3 months ago. "Tracy, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer. When you visit your father at his house, does Ella usually arrange the visits? Does she coordinate the timing?" My mouth went dry. She said Dad got confused easily with too many visitors, that we should take turns so we wouldn't overwhelm him. "And when you're there, how long do your visits typically last?" "An hour, maybe 2. Ella always said longer visits tired him out." The words felt like ash in my mouth as I spoke them. Detective Williams nodded grimly. "Tracy, we think the man you've been visiting isn't your father." The words hit me like a physical blow. What are you talking about? Of course it's my father. I know my own father. We believe your real father has been in residential care for 5 years, paying for treatment he may not have needed. And the man you've been visiting. He pulled out another photograph. This is Thomas Reeves. Thomas. He's been reported missing from a care facility in Nevada for the past 3 years. His family has been looking for him. I stared at the photo. The man looked so much like Dad. Similar age, similar build, similar facial features. But now, looking at it objectively, I could see the subtle differences. The shape of his nose, the way his ears sat. The scar Dad had on his forehead from a childhood accident that this man didn't have. No, I whispered. No, this is insane. Ella couldn't have. She wouldn't have. Tracy, think about it. When did you first notice your father's memory problems? I forced myself to remember. About 2 years ago, right around the time Ella started visiting him more regularly. And before that? Before that, he was fine. We talked on the phone regularly. He managed all his own affairs. My voice broke as the realization hit me. Oh my God, she replaced him. Detective Williams nodded. We believe Ella placed your real father in residential care 5 years ago, using his money to pay for it. Then she found Thomas Reeves, a man with dementia who looked remarkably similar to your father, and somehow convinced him he was living in his own home. The scope of it was beyond anything I could have imagined. But why? Why go to such elaborate lengths? Control. With your real father in care, she could forge his signature on documents, access his accounts, sell his property, and with Thomas Reeves playing the role of your confused father, she could maintain the illusion that he was still living independently, but needed help managing his affairs. I thought about all those visits. How Dad had seemed different somehow, more confused than I remembered. How he'd forgotten stories that had been important to him. How he'd seemed to recognize me but not quite connect with me the way he used to. The man in the hospital, I said slowly. The one I've been sitting with, thinking he was my father, is Thomas Reeves, and when he started showing signs of improvement, when the medications she'd been giving him started wearing off and he began to remember who he really was, she panicked. She couldn't let him recover enough to tell anyone his real name. My legs gave out and I collapsed into a chair. Where is my real father? Detective Williams's expression softened. He's alive, Tracy. We contacted Sunrise Memory Care this morning. He's been there the entire time, listed under a false medical condition. The staff thought Ella was his devoted daughter, visiting regularly and handling all his care decisions. Is he? How is he? According to the facility, he's been asking about you and questioning why you never visit. Ella told them you lived far away and couldn't travel due to work commitments. Tears streamed down my face as the full horror of what Ella had done sank in. She hadn't just been stealing Dad's money. She had stolen 5 years of his life. 5 years of our relationship. She had hidden him away like some shameful secret while parading a stranger in his place. There's more, Detective Williams said gently. The note Ella left in her cell. It wasn't a suicide note. It was a confession. She knew we were getting close to the truth, and she wanted to control how the story came out. He handed me a piece of paper. In Ella's handwriting, it read, Tracy will never forgive me when she learns the truth about who she's been visiting. Our real father has been asking for her for 5 years. I kept them apart because I was afraid she'd stop me from getting what our family deserved. I never meant for it to go this far. I stared at the words, trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. Ella hadn't just tried to kill someone she thought was our father. She had kidnapped a confused elderly man, used him as a prop in her elaborate scheme, and kept our real father isolated and wondering why his daughter had abandoned him. "Can I see him?" I whispered. "Can I see my real father?" "We're arranging transport now. Tracy, I have to warn you. He's been told you didn't want to see him. Ella convinced the facility staff that you blamed him for your mother's death and wanted nothing to do with him. He may not understand at first why you're there." The cruelty of it took my breath away. Not only had Ella stolen 5 years from us, she had poisoned Dad's heart against me, making him believe I had rejected him when all I'd wanted was to be there for him. What about Thomas Reeves, the man I thought was Dad? He'll be returned to his family once he's medically stable. They've been searching for him for 3 years, never giving up hope. Thanks to your sister's twisted scheme, they'll finally have their father back. I sat in that conference room, surrounded by evidence of a betrayal so complex and heartless that I could barely comprehend it. Ella hadn't just been greedy. She had orchestrated an elaborate deception that had destroyed multiple lives, separated families, and turned love into a weapon of manipulation. The man I'd been grieving for, worrying about, trying to protect, he wasn't even my father. My real father had been alone in a care facility for 5 years, paying for his own imprisonment while believing his daughter had abandoned him. And somewhere in Nevada, a family had been desperately searching for their missing father, never knowing he was being used as a pawn in my sister's sick game. "Detective Williams," I said, my voice stronger now despite the tears. "I want to press every charge possible against Ella. Kidnapping, elder abuse, fraud, identity theft, everything. What she did goes beyond stealing money. She stole years of our lives." He nodded. "We're building the strongest case we can. But Tracy, I need you to be prepared. When this story comes out, it's going to be big. The media will want to know how someone could orchestrate such an elaborate deception for so long." I thought about that question. How had Ella managed to fool everyone? How had she convinced a care facility that she was acting in Dad's best interest? How had she found Thomas Reeves and convinced him to play along? How had she maintained such an intricate web of lies for 5 years? The answer was both simple and terrifying. She had counted on our love and trust. She had used our family bonds as weapons, knowing that I would believe her when she said Dad was getting confused, that I would respect her suggestion to coordinate our visits, that I would trust her to handle his medical care. She had turned our love for Dad into the perfect cover for her crimes. "I need to call the hospital," I said suddenly. "Thomas Reeves's family needs to know he's alive, and I need to get to Sunrise Memory Care as fast as possible. Tracy, there's one more thing. Your real father, he's been writing you letters, hundreds of them. The facility has been holding them because Ella told them you'd requested no contact. They're all addressed to you, asking you to visit, telling you how much he misses you." My heart shattered completely. While I'd been visiting a stranger, believing I was caring for my confused father, my real father had been pouring his heart out in letters I never received, wondering why his daughter had abandoned him in his time of need. Ella hadn't just stolen his money. She had stolen his hope, his dignity, and 5 years of the father-daughter relationship I treasured more than anything in the world. But now, I knew the truth, and I was going to make sure that every day my father had lost, every letter he'd written that I never received, every moment of confusion and abandonment he'd endured would be answered with justice. The game Ella had been playing was over, and she had finally lost. The drive to Sunrise Memory Care felt like traveling through a nightmare. Every mile brought me closer to a father who thought I'd abandoned him, and further from the illusion of the sister I thought I knew. Detective Williams had arranged for me to meet Dr. Sarah Chen, the facility director, before seeing Dad. She waited in the parking lot, her expression grave. "Mrs. Soto, I need to prepare you for what you're about to learn. Your father has been asking about you every single day for 5 years. Your sister told us you blamed him for your mother's death and couldn't bear to see him. We believed her because she had all the legal documentation." My hands clenched into fists. "What kind of documentation?" "Power of attorney, medical directives, financial guardianship. Everything appeared legitimate. She said she was protecting both of you from painful confrontations." We walked toward the building, and Dr. Chen continued. "Your father talks about you constantly. He remembers everything about your childhood, your achievements, how proud he was of you. The only thing that confused him was why you never came." I stopped walking. "Dr. Chen, I need to ask you something. Did my sister ever bring anyone else here? Did she ever mention having someone else visit my father?" Her brow furrowed. "That's odd that you ask. About 6 months ago, she did bring an elderly man with her. Said he was a family friend who wanted to meet your father. They spent about an hour together, and afterward, your father seemed different, more agitated. He started asking more questions about why you wouldn't visit." A chill ran down my spine. "What did this man look like?" "Similar build to your father, gray hair, but he seemed confused. Ella said he had dementia and sometimes got disoriented about where he was." Thomas Reeves. Ella had brought Thomas Reeves here to meet my real father. But why? "Dr. Chen, I need to see my father's room. Everything. His belongings, his letters, everything Ella might have left here." She led me through sterile hallways lined with cheerful artwork that couldn't mask the institutional smell of antiseptic and age. Dad's room was small but comfortable, with photos I recognized covering every surface. Pictures of me graduating college, getting married, family vacations from decades ago. But there were also photos I'd never seen before, recent ones. "Dr. Chen, where did these come from?" I pointed to pictures of me at what looked like family gatherings, birthday parties, holiday celebrations. Her face went pale. "Your sister brought those. She said they were from family events you attended, but that your father wasn't invited to because of the tension between you." I stared at the photographs. In every single one, I was smiling and laughing with people I'd never met in my life. The backgrounds were familiar, though. They looked like the assisted living facility where I'd been visiting who I thought was my father. "These are fake," I whispered. "These are digitally altered. She photoshopped me into pictures with other families." Dr. Chen's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, she was showing these to your father, telling him about all the family celebrations you were having without him. She said you were building a new life and didn't want him to be part of it." The cruelty was breathtaking. Not only had Ella separated us, she had created fake evidence of my happiness without him. She had tortured my father with fabricated proof that I was living a full, joyful life while deliberately excluding him. "There's more," Dr. Chen said quietly. "Your father's medical records. I need to show you something that's been bothering me for months." She led me to her office and pulled out a thick file. "Your father's cognitive function has been remarkably stable for someone with his diagnosis. In fact, his memory and reasoning skills have actually improved since he's been here. That's very unusual for dementia patients." I flipped through the medical reports, seeing test scores and evaluations that painted a picture of a man whose mind was sharp, not deteriorating. "Dr. Chen, what was my father's original diagnosis? Who made it?" Your sister brought him here with documentation from Dr. Marcus Webb. The diagnosis was early-stage dementia with episodes of confusion and memory loss. I need to see that documentation. She pulled out another file, and my blood ran cold as I read the medical reports. The handwriting, the terminology, even the letterhead looked wrong. I'd seen enough medical documents caring for who I thought was my father to recognize the inconsistencies. Dr. Chen, I think these medical records are forged. I think my father was never diagnosed with dementia at all. Her face went white. That's impossible. We can't admit patients without proper medical documentation. Can you run new cognitive tests? Independent evaluations? We actually did 3 months ago because his improvement was so remarkable. The results showed no signs of dementia whatsoever. We thought it was a miracle recovery. The room spun around me. You mean my father doesn't have dementia? He never did? According to our tests, no. His mind is completely sharp. We assumed the original diagnosis was wrong, or that he was one of those rare cases of reversal. But if you're saying the documentation might be forged? I sank into a chair as the full scope of Ella's betrayal became clear. She hadn't just hidden my father away because of his condition. She had created a fake condition to justify hiding him away. She had forged medical records to make it seem like he needed specialized care, when really she just needed him isolated and under her control. Dr. Chen, my father has been imprisoned here for 5 years based on fake medical records? If what you're suggesting is true, then yes. And Mrs. Soto, there's something else. Your sister has been paying for his care with funds from an account linked to his Social Security number, but the payments have been coming from multiple sources. We assumed it was his pension and benefits, but the amounts were unusually large for someone of his work history. She was using his identity for her fraud operation, I said, the pieces falling into place. She needed him isolated so he couldn't discover what she was doing with his name, his credit, his entire identity. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Your father isn't sick, is he? No, he's not sick. He's been a prisoner. I thought about all the times I'd visited Thomas Reeves, believing he was my confused father, feeling heartbroken by his declining condition. Meanwhile, my real father had been trapped here, completely lucid, wondering why his daughter had abandoned him and believing fake photographs that showed me celebrating life without him. Ella hadn't just committed fraud. She had orchestrated the perfect psychological torture for both of us. She had made me grieve for a father who was alive and well, while making him suffer the agony of believing his daughter had rejected him. I need to see him now, I said, my voice shaking with rage and desperation. And Dr. Chen, I need you to call the police. My sister hasn't just been committing financial fraud. She's been holding my father prisoner with forged medical documents. As we walked toward his room, Dr. Chen said quietly, Mrs. Soto, there's one more thing. Your father has been working on something in his room. Art therapy, we thought. But now that you're telling me all this, I think you should see what he's been creating. She opened his door, and I saw my father for the first time in 5 years. He was sitting at a small desk, his hair completely white now, but his posture straight, his eyes alert and intelligent. Not the confused, declining man I'd been grieving for. He looked up as we entered, and his face went through a series of emotions. Confusion, disbelief, and then pure joy. Tracy? His voice was strong, clear, nothing like the mumbling confusion I'd associated with dementia. Is it really you? I ran to him, and he stood to embrace me, his arms strong and steady. Dad, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I thought you were somewhere else. I thought... She told me you couldn't forgive me for your mother's death, he whispered against my hair. She said you blamed me and never wanted to see me again. Never, I sobbed. I've been trying to take care of you for 5 years. I was taking care of the wrong person. He pulled back to look at me, his eyes sharp with intelligence. Tracy, I've been trying to figure out what Ella was doing. Look. He turned to show me what he'd been working on. The desk was covered with notebooks, filled with meticulous handwriting. Lists of dates, amounts, names, account numbers, a complex web of connections drawn in different colored pens. Dad, what is all this? I've been tracking every conversation I've had with Ella, every story she's told me about where you were, every excuse she's made. I started noticing inconsistencies about 2 years ago. She'd tell me you were in California one week, then mention you being in New York the next, like she was making it up as she went along. I stared at the notebooks. My father had been conducting his own investigation from inside this facility, trying to piece together the truth about why his daughter had disappeared from his life. But Dad, how did you know something was wrong? His eyes hardened. Because I know my daughter, and the Tracy she described to me, bitter, unforgiving, selfish, that wasn't my little girl. So I started documenting everything, hoping that someday I'd be able to prove what I suspected. What did you suspect? That Ella was lying about everything, that you didn't even know where I was. I looked at his careful documentation. Years of detective work done by a man the world thought was losing his mind. Dad, you've been solving this case from the inside. I've been preparing for the day you'd finally come, because I knew you would. I knew my daughter wouldn't abandon me unless she didn't know where to find me. The emotion hit me like a physical blow. While I'd been grieving his supposed decline, he'd been maintaining faith in our relationship and building a case to prove his daughter's innocence. Dr. Chen stared at the notebooks. Mr. Soto, this is incredible. You've documented everything. Doctor, I need you to understand something. I was never sick. I don't know what papers my daughter showed you, but I've never been diagnosed with dementia. I came here because Ella told me Tracy was having a breakdown and needed time to heal, and that this was temporary housing until I could move closer to her. The final piece clicked into place. Ella hadn't just forged medical records to get him admitted. She had lied to him about why he was here, making him complicit in his own imprisonment by convincing him it was temporary and for my benefit. She told you this was temporary? She said a few months, maybe a year. That was 5 years ago. I sat down heavily, overwhelmed by the scope of the deception. Ella had manipulated everyone, the facility staff with forged medical records, Dad with lies about my mental state, and me with an elaborate identity swap that kept me visiting the wrong person entirely. Dad, do you remember a man named Thomas Reeves? Ella brought him here to meet you. His expression darkened. That poor soul. She brought him here and told me he was a family friend who wanted to meet me, but the man was clearly confused and scared. He kept asking where his daughter Sarah was. After he left, I started wondering if Ella was doing to him what she was doing to us, keeping families apart. My father had figured it out. Even from inside this facility, even believing I had abandoned him, he had pieced together that Ella was manipulating multiple families. Dad, I need to tell you something. For 5 years, I've been visiting Thomas Reeves, thinking he was you. Ella convinced me you were living in assisted living and that I should visit you there. His face went through a series of emotions. You mean, you never abandoned me? You've been trying to take care of me this whole time? Every week, Dad. I've been there every week, worried about your health, trying to help with your medication, bringing you your favorite foods. I was bringing them to the wrong person. He started laughing, but it was the laughter of someone who'd been holding back tears for 5 years. My brilliant daughter, taking care of a stranger because she thought it was her father. And that stranger's daughter was probably doing the same thing somewhere else. The beautiful, terrible irony of it hit me. While I'd been caring for Thomas Reeves, his real daughter had probably been desperately searching for him, just like my father had been waiting for me. Dad, we're going to get you out of here. Today. And we're going to make sure Ella faces justice for what she's done to both our families. He nodded, then picked up one of his notebooks. Tracy, everything we need to prove her fraud is right here. Names, dates, account numbers she's mentioned, inconsistencies in her stories. I've been building a case for 5 years. I looked at my father, not confused, not declining, but sharp and determined and ready to fight. Ella had tried to bury him in this facility, but instead, she'd given him 5 years to document her crimes and maintain his faith in our relationship. The man I'd been mourning was standing right in front of me, stronger and more determined than ever. And together, we were going to bring my sister's house of lies crashing down. Walking out of that facility with Dad felt surreal. After 5 years of believing I was losing him to dementia, here he was, sharp, determined, carrying notebooks full of evidence like some kind of undercover detective. We drove to my apartment in relative silence, both of us processing the magnitude of what Ella had done. I need to call Detective Williams, I said as we settled into my living room. He needs to know what we've discovered. Dad nodded, spreading his notebooks across my coffee table. Tracy, before you do that, there's something else. Something I didn't want to say in front of the doctor. The tone in his voice made me pause. What is it, Dad? About 3 months ago, Ella started visiting me more frequently. She seemed anxious. Kept asking me questions about our family finances, about investments your mother and I made years ago. I sat down across from him. What kind of questions? She wanted to know about the property in Nevada, the land your mother inherited from her uncle before she died. My blood went cold. Dad, what property in Nevada? Mom never mentioned any inheritance. He looked confused. Tracy, that land has been generating income for our family for over 20 years. It's worth a lot. I assumed you knew. I had no idea. Dad's expression darkened. Then Ella never told you about the trust. What trust? The family trust your mother and I set up when you girls were teenagers. Everything we owned, the house, the investments, the Nevada property, it all goes into the trust when I die. You and Ella are equal beneficiaries. The room started spinning. Dad, how much are we talking about? With the property values now, probably close to $2 million. I stared at him, trying to process this information. Ella had orchestrated this entire elaborate scheme. The forged medical records, the identity swap, keeping us apart for 5 years, all while there was a massive inheritance at stake that I didn't even know existed. Dad, if you had died in that facility, Ella would have inherited everything. The trust specifies that if one beneficiary can't be located or is deemed unfit, the other inherits the full amount. The pieces were falling into place, but they painted a picture so dark I could barely comprehend it. She wasn't just keeping us apart for control. She was positioning herself to inherit everything by making me disappear. That's what I started suspecting, especially when she began asking about my will, about whether I'd made any recent changes. I felt sick. Dad, she's been planning this for years. The whole scheme, it wasn't just about keeping us apart. It was about eliminating me as an heir. Tracy, there's more. My heart sank. What else? Dad pulled out a specific notebook, one with red tabs marking certain pages. Remember how I told you I've been documenting everything? Well, I also started recording our conversations. The facility has a phone in the common room, and I figured out how to use the voice memo function. He handed me his old smartphone. Listen to this. It's from 2 weeks ago. I pressed play, and Ella's voice filled the room. Dad, you understand that Tracy isn't coming back, right? She's made it clear she doesn't want anything to do with our family. Dad's voice. But Ella, it's been 5 years. Maybe if we reached out. No, Dad, trust me on this. She's moved on completely. She even told me she doesn't want any part of the inheritance when the time comes. My voice caught. Dad, I never said that. I never even knew there was an inheritance. Keep listening, he whispered. Ella's voice continued. Actually, she asked me to handle all the legal paperwork. She wants to sign her portion over to me now, so there won't be any complications later. Are you sure that's what she wants? Completely sure. In fact, I have the paperwork ready. All I need is for you to sign off on the transfer as the trustee. The recording ended, and I sat there in stunned silence. Dad, she was trying to get you to transfer my inheritance to her while I was completely unaware it existed. It gets worse, Tracy. I didn't think it could get worse, but Dad pulled out another notebook. Last month, she brought those transfer papers to the facility. She had them all drawn up by some lawyer, making it look official. She told me you had already signed them and just needed my signature to complete the process. Did you sign them? No, something felt wrong. The paper said you were living in Oregon and couldn't travel for the signing, but she'd been telling me you were in California. I started asking questions, and she got flustered and said she'd bring them back later. She never came back? Oh, she came back, but not with papers. Dad's expression grew grim. She came back with a different plan. I leaned forward, dreading what he was about to tell me. She started talking about how the facility wasn't taking good enough care of me, how I seemed to be declining. She suggested maybe it would be better if I signed a DNR, a do not resuscitate order. My blood turned to ice. A DNR? She said it would ensure I wouldn't suffer if my condition got worse, that it was the compassionate thing to do. The full scope of Ella's plan hit me like a physical blow. She hadn't just been trying to steal my inheritance through legal manipulation. She had been preparing to let Dad die in that facility, eliminating the trustee and leaving her as the sole surviving heir. Dad, did you sign it? I told her I needed to think about it. That's when I knew I had to start recording everything and documenting her visits more carefully. I stood up, pacing around the room. She isolated you from me so I couldn't interfere with the inheritance transfer. When that didn't work fast enough, she started pushing for a DNR so you'd die and she'd inherit everything automatically. Tracy, there's one more thing. I turned to face him, not sure I could handle another revelation. The night before you found me, she came to visit. She seemed different, desperate, almost panicked. She kept asking if I had told anyone about our family's finances, if I had mentioned the trust to any of the staff. What did you tell her? I told her no, that I hadn't discussed our personal business with anyone, but I think she suspected I was onto her scheme. Dad opened the final notebook. She left early that night, but I saw her talking to one of the night staff members in the hallway. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but she handed him something, an envelope. The pieces clicked together in my mind. Dad, I think she was bribing someone on the staff, maybe to make sure that if anything happened to you, it would look natural. That's what I was afraid of. I sat back down, overwhelmed by the magnitude of Ella's betrayal. This wasn't just about keeping us apart or even about stealing money. She had been systematically positioning herself to inherit our entire family's wealth, and she was willing to let Dad die to make it happen. "We need to call Detective Williams right now," I said, reaching for my phone. "Tracy, wait." Dad grabbed my arm gently. "Before we involve the police, you need to know something else, something that changes everything." I looked at him, seeing an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of sadness and determination that made my stomach drop. "What is it, Dad?" "Ella isn't just my stepdaughter, Tracy. She's not your half-sister." The room went silent except for the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. "What do you mean?" Dad took a deep breath. "Your mother and I, we never had another child together. When your mother died, I was so devastated, so lost. About a year later, I met a woman named Patricia Preston. She had a teenage daughter, Ella. Patricia and I dated for about 2 years." I stared at him, trying to process what he was telling me. "Patricia was going through some financial troubles, and I helped them out. I paid for Ella's college, helped them with rent, treated Ella like she was my own daughter. But Patricia and I never married. We broke up when Ella was in her early 20s. "Then how is Ella my sister?" "She isn't. Biologically, legally, in any official way, she's not related to us at all. But she's been calling herself Ella Soto for over 20 years, and I never corrected her because I thought of her as family." The implications hit me like a tsunami. "Dad, if she's not legally your daughter—" "She has no claim to the inheritance, none whatsoever. The trust specifies biological children only." I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. So this entire scheme, keeping us apart, the forged documents, the identity swap, pushing for the DNR, she did all of this to steal an inheritance she was never entitled to in the first place. "Tracy, there's more. The Nevada property? The one generating all that income? Ella's been collecting those checks for the past 3 years. She convinced me to set up direct deposit to an account she said she was managing for the family. She's been stealing from us for 3 years? And she would have inherited everything if her plan had worked. If I had died in that facility and you had remained missing, she would have claimed to be my only surviving heir." I stood up, my hands shaking with rage and disbelief. Ella hadn't just betrayed her family. She had spent decades building a false identity, positioning herself to steal everything from people who had treated her like family. "Dad, we're not just talking about fraud anymore. We're talking about identity theft, forgery, elder abuse, and attempted murder." He nodded grimly. "And she almost got away with it." I picked up my phone, my hands still trembling. "Detective Williams, it's Tracy Soto. We need to meet immediately, and you're going to want to bring the fraud department, because what we've uncovered is bigger than either of us imagined." As I hung up the phone, Dad reached over and squeezed my hand. "Tracy, for 5 years I've been trapped in that place, wondering if my daughter had really abandoned me. Finding out the truth, that you never stopped caring, that you were being deceived just like I was, that's worth more than any inheritance. We're going to get justice, Dad, for both of us. And for Thomas Reeves and his family, too." I nodded, looking at the notebooks spread across my table. 5 years of meticulous documentation that would help bring down the woman who had tried to destroy our family and steal our legacy. Ella Preston had built her entire adult life on a lie, and now that house of cards was about to come crashing down. 2 hours later, Detective Williams sat across from Dad and me in my living room, flanked by Detective Sarah Chen from the Fraud Department and Assistant District Attorney Marcus Rodriguez. The notebooks, documents, and evidence we'd gathered covered every surface of my coffee table. "Mrs. Soto, what you're describing is one of the most elaborate long-term fraud schemes we've encountered," Detective Chen said, reviewing Dad's meticulous notes. Identity theft, elder abuse, forgery, embezzlement, and attempted inheritance fraud spanning over 2 decades. The financial crimes alone could result in 20 to 30 years in prison, Ada Rodriguez added, flipping through the bank statements. But the attempted murder charges would carry a life sentence. Dad leaned forward. Detective Williams, I need to know, have you been able to locate Ella? We have her under surveillance at her apartment. She doesn't know we're aware of the full scope yet. We want to coordinate the arrest carefully to ensure we recover all evidence and assets. What about the money she's already stolen? I asked. Detective Chen looked up from her notes. The Nevada property income alone totals over $400,000 over 3 years. Combined with the identity theft and fraudulent access to your father's accounts, we're looking at nearly $600,000 in stolen funds. My stomach turned. $600,000? Money that should have been helping Dad get proper care? Money that could have changed both our lives? There's something else, Detective Williams said. We've been investigating the memory care facility. 3 staff members have come forward about Ella's visits and the gifts she brought them. Cash payments to ensure your father remained isolated and that certain medical decisions would go unquestioned. Bribery charges too, Ada Rodriguez noted. When do we confront her? I asked. Today, this afternoon. But Mrs. Soto, we need you to make the initial contact. Get her to come here, to your home, where we can control the environment. My heart pounded. You want me to call her? We'll be positioned outside, recording everything. The moment she arrives and we have her confession on tape, we move in. Dad reached for my hand. Tracy, you don't have to do this. The evidence we have is already overwhelming. No, Dad. I need to look her in the eye. I need her to know that I know everything. Detective Williams handed me a small recording device. This goes in your pocket. Act natural, but try to get her to admit to the major crimes. The identity theft, the stolen money, the DNR manipulation. What if she gets suspicious? She won't, Detective Chen said confidently. According to her behavior pattern, she believes she's still in control. She thinks your father is safely locked away, and you're still in the dark. I took a deep breath and picked up my phone. My hands trembled as I scrolled to Ella's number. The same number I'd been calling for 5 years, begging to see Dad, never knowing she was the reason I couldn't. The phone rang 3 times before she answered. Tracy, this is unexpected. How are you holding up, sweetie? That fake concern in her voice made my skin crawl. Ella, I need to see you. Something's happened with Dad. A pause. What kind of something? I can't discuss it over the phone. Can you come to my house? It's urgent. Of course, honey. I'll be right there. She hung up, and I looked at the detectives. She's coming. Remember, Detective Williams said as they prepared to leave. Get her talking about the finances, about keeping you away from your father, about the DNR. Let her think she's still fooling you. After they left to position themselves outside, Dad and I sat in tense silence. Tracy, are you sure about this? Dad, for 5 years I blamed myself for not being a better daughter. I thought I had failed you. I need to hear her admit what she did to us. 20 minutes later, I heard Ella's car in the driveway. My heart hammered as her familiar footsteps approached the front door. When I opened it, she looked exactly the same. Perfectly styled hair, designer clothes, that practiced smile that had fooled me for decades. Tracy, darling, you look exhausted. This whole situation with Dad has been so hard on you. She walked past me into the living room, and I saw her eyes quickly scan the space. Did she notice the notebooks were gone from where she'd seen them before? Sit down, Ella. We need to talk. She settled onto my couch, crossing her legs elegantly. Of course. What's happened? Is Dad okay? I sat across from her, the recording device feeling heavy in my pocket. That depends on how you define okay. What do you mean? I found him, Ella. The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly. Found him? Tracy, what are you talking about? Sunset Manor Memory Care. 5 years, Ella. 5 years he's been there while you told me he was living independently. She blinked rapidly, her mind clearly racing. Tracy, I think you're confused. Dad is at home. I just saw him last week. Stop lying. My voice was steadier than I felt. I've seen the admission paperwork. I've talked to the staff. I know everything. Ella's facade began to crack. Tracy, you don't understand. I was trying to protect you. Dad's condition. It was too difficult for you to see. Protect me? By forging my signature on legal documents? By stealing my identity? She stood up abruptly. I don't know what you think you've discovered, but you're clearly upset and not thinking straight. Sit down, Ella. Something in my tone made her freeze. I said, sit down. She slowly returned to the couch, and I saw fear in her eyes for the first time. I know about the trust, Ella. The $2 million trust that Dad set up for his biological children. Her hands started shaking. I know about the Nevada property. The rental income you've been stealing for 3 years. Tracy, I can explain. I know that you're not Dad's daughter. Not legally, not biologically. You're Patricia Preston's daughter, and you have no legal claim to any inheritance. Ella's mask completely fell away. The warm, caring sister I thought I knew disappeared, replaced by someone cold and calculating. You don't know what you're talking about. I know that you convinced Dad to sign a DNR order, hoping he would die so you could claim an inheritance that was never yours. She laughed, but it was harsh and bitter. Prove it. I know that when the DNR wasn't working fast enough, you started bribing staff members to ensure Dad's death would look natural. You can't prove any of this. I leaned forward. Actually, I can. Dad kept detailed notes for 5 years. Every conversation, every visit, every suspicious incident. He documented everything, Ella. She was quiet for a long moment. Then her expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. Your precious father was losing his mind anyway. He was going to die in that place, forgotten and alone. At least my way, his death would have served a purpose. Your way? You mean murder? I mean making sure the money went to someone who actually deserved it. Someone who spent 20 years taking care of him, managing his affairs, dealing with his problems. Someone who lied about being his daughter. Ella stood up again, pacing now. I was more of a daughter to him than you ever were. Where were you when he needed help with his medications? Where were you when he was confused and scared? I was there, Tracy. I was always there. Because you were stealing from him. I was managing his assets? Do you think he was capable of handling a $2 million trust? Do you think he would have made smart decisions about that Nevada property? So you decided to steal it instead. I decided to ensure it was handled properly. And when he died, I would have used that money to honor his memory, to make sure his legacy lived on. By pretending to be someone you're not? She spun around to face me. I've been Ella Soto longer than I was ever Ella Preston. That name, that identity, that family, it's mine. I earned it. You stole it. I lived it. Her voice rose to a shout. While you were off living your little life, completely oblivious to Dad's needs, I was the one making the hard decisions. I was the one dealing with doctors and lawyers and financial advisors. You were the one forging signatures and bribing staff members. I was the one ensuring that when the time came, the transition would be smooth, that the money would go to someone who understood its value. The transition? You mean Dad's death? She stopped pacing and looked at me with cold eyes. Your father is 83 years old with advancing dementia. He's living in a facility where he barely recognizes his own reflection. His quality of life is gone, Tracy. The DNR was a mercy. The DNR was attempted murder. The DNR was acceptance of reality. And when natural causes took too long, I simply expedited the process. My blood ran cold. What did you do? What needed to be done? What any rational person would do when faced with prolonged suffering. You tried to kill him? She shrugged. I tried to end his suffering while ensuring his legacy was protected. His legacy or your bank account? Both. She sat back down, suddenly looking exhausted. Tracy, you have to understand, I've devoted my entire adult life to this family. 25 years of managing Dad's affairs, dealing with his health issues, making sure he was comfortable. I deserve that inheritance. You deserve prison. She laughed again, that same bitter sound. For what? Taking care of a man who couldn't take care of himself? For making difficult decisions that his biological daughter was too selfish to make? For identity theft? For elder abuse? For embezzlement? For attempted murder? You'll never prove the murder charge. What about the staff member you bribed? The envelope Dad saw you give him? For the first time, Ella looked genuinely worried. That was just to ensure Dad's comfort, to make sure he got extra attention. Extra attention? Or extra help dying? She stood up abruptly. This conversation is over. Whatever you think you know, whatever evidence you think you have, it won't hold up. I've been managing Dad's care for 5 years. I have legal documentation for everything. Forged documentation. Prove it. I stood up too, feeling a surge of confidence. I already have. That's when I heard the front door open, and Detective Williams walked in with Detective Chen and 2 uniformed officers. Ella Preston, Detective Williams said, pulling out handcuffs. You're under arrest for identity theft, elder abuse, embezzlement, fraud, and attempted murder. Ella's face went white as she realized she'd been recorded, that every word of our conversation had been captured. You set me up, she whispered. I gave you a chance to tell the truth, I replied. You chose to confess to attempted murder instead. As the officers read her rights, Ella looked at me with pure hatred. You have no idea what you've done. That money, that trust, you'll never be able to manage it properly. You'll waste it, just like you wasted the last 5 years of your father's life. The last 5 years that you stole from both of us, I said quietly. As they led her away, she turned back one final time. I loved him more than you ever did. No, I said, watching the woman I'd called sister disappear into the police car. You loved his money. There's a difference. The house felt eerily quiet after everyone left. I sat in my living room, staring at the spot where Ella had been sitting just minutes before, still trying to process everything that had happened. 25 years of lies, 25 years of manipulation, and I had never suspected a thing. My phone rang, and I saw it was the memory care facility. Ms. Soto, this is Jennifer from Sunset Manor. Your father is asking for you. He says he has something important to tell you about getting your life back. I smiled for the first time in hours. Tell him I'm on my way. The courthouse steps felt cold beneath my feet as I walked up them that Tuesday morning. 3 weeks had passed since Ella's arrest, and today was her arraignment. I hadn't seen her since the police led her away in handcuffs, but I knew she was about to face the full weight of what she'd done. Detective Williams met me at the entrance. "Are you ready for this, Tracy?" I nodded, though my hands were shaking. Dad wanted to be here, but his doctor said the stress wouldn't be good for him. He's given us everything we need through his testimony. Your father's memory might be affected by dementia, but his recollection of recent events has been remarkably clear. Inside the courtroom, I took a seat in the gallery. When they brought Ella in, I barely recognized her. Gone was the confident woman who had controlled every aspect of Dad's life for 5 years. She looked small, defeated, wearing an orange jumpsuit that seemed to swallow her whole. Her eyes found mine across the courtroom, and for a moment, I saw something that looked like regret. But then her lawyer whispered something in her ear, and that familiar hardness returned to her face. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Ms. Rodriguez, stood to read the charges. The defendant, Ella Marie Preston, is charged with identity theft in the first degree, elder abuse, embezzlement of funds totaling $600,000, fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. Attempted murder. The words still sent chills down my spine. When asked how she pleaded, Ella's voice was barely a whisper. Not guilty. But I knew the truth. We all did. After the arraignment, Ms. Rodriguez pulled me aside. Tracy, I need to prepare you for what's coming. Ella's defense attorney is going to paint her as a devoted caregiver who was acting in your father's best interests. They're going to claim she genuinely believed she was helping him. What about her confession? The recording? They'll try to get it thrown out. Say it was coerced, that she was in emotional distress. We need to be prepared with more evidence. That's when she told me about Marcus Chen, the memory care aide who had accepted money from Ella. He had agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence on his own charges. 2 days later, I sat across from Marcus in the prosecutor's office. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 25, with guilt written across his face. I never meant for anyone to get hurt, he said, avoiding my eyes. She told me she was his daughter, that she just wanted to make sure he was comfortable. What exactly did she ask you to do? Marcus took a deep breath. At first, it was small things. Make sure his medications were given on time. Keep her updated on his condition. She said you lived far away and couldn't visit often. And then? Then she started asking me to adjust things. His meal schedule, his medication timing. She said it would help him sleep better, be more comfortable. Ms. Rodriguez leaned forward. Marcus, what did Ella give you money to do the day Mr. Soto collapsed? His voice dropped to almost a whisper. She gave me a syringe, said it was a mild sedative that would help him rest peacefully. She said the doctor had prescribed it, but that the nursing staff was too busy to administer it properly. Did you believe her? I wanted to. The money. I needed the money for my mom's medical bills. But when I saw him collapse, when I saw how he stopped breathing, Marcus put his head in his hands. I knew she'd lied to me. I knew I'd almost killed an innocent man. What did you do? I called for help immediately, started CPR. I couldn't live with myself if he died because of what I did. After Marcus left, Ms. Rodriguez turned to me. His testimony, combined with the recorded confession and the financial evidence, should be enough for a conviction. But Tracy, you need to understand. Ella's lawyer is going to try to destroy your credibility too. What do you mean? They're going to claim you abandoned your father, that you never visited, never called, never cared about his welfare until money was involved. I felt my chest tighten. But I tried to visit. She kept me away with those forged documents. I know that, and we can prove that. But they're going to make this about more than just the legal charges. They're going to make it personal." She was right. The trial began 6 weeks later. Ella had lost weight, and her hair had gone completely gray. She kept her eyes down as the prosecution laid out their case, detailing the elaborate fraud she'd constructed over 5 years. When it was the defense's turn, her lawyer stood up with a sympathetic smile. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this case isn't about greed or manipulation. It's about a woman who stepped up when no one else would." I watched in horror as he painted a picture of Ella as a selfless caregiver who had devoted her life to helping an elderly man with dementia. He talked about the long hours she spent at the facility, the medical appointments she managed, the difficult decisions she made. "Where was Tracy Soto during all of this?" he asked, gesturing toward me. Where was the biological daughter when her father needed care? When he was confused and frightened? When he needed someone to advocate for his medical needs? "Objection," Ms. Rodriguez called out. "Relevance?" "Sustained," the judge replied, but the damage was done. I could see some jurors looking at me with suspicion. When it was my turn to testify, Ella's lawyer was ruthless. "Ms. Soto, when was the last time you visited your father before discovering this supposed fraud?" "I tried to visit many times, but I was told he didn't want to see me." "Told by whom?" "By Ella and by the facility staff." "Did you ever think to call the facility directly, to speak with his doctors?" I trusted what I was being told." "So you took someone else's word rather than making an effort to see your own father?" Ms. Rodriguez objected again, but I could feel the jury's judgment. They were seeing me as the neglectful daughter who only cared about money. But then Marcus took the stand. He described in detail how Ella had manipulated him, how she'd used his financial desperation to turn him into an unwitting accomplice. When he broke down crying while describing the night Dad collapsed, I saw the jury's sympathy shift. "She told me it would help him pass peacefully," Marcus sobbed. "She said he was suffering, that this was a mercy. I believed her because I wanted to believe her, because I needed that money. But when I saw him stop breathing, when I realized what I'd almost done, I've never forgiven myself." The most powerful moment came when they played the recording of Ella's confession. Her own voice filled the courtroom, cold and calculating, as she admitted to attempting to end Dad's life. "I tried to end his suffering while ensuring his legacy was protected." "His legacy? Or your bank account?" "Both." The jury listened in stunned silence as she described the DNR as acceptance of reality and admitted to expediting the process when natural causes took too long. When the recording ended, Ella was staring at the table, her shoulders shaking. The financial evidence was overwhelming. Bank records showing transfers from Dad's accounts to accounts Ella had opened using her false identity. Property deeds she'd forged, investment documents with her signature pretending to be his daughter. Dr. Patterson, Dad's longtime physician, testified that he'd been specifically instructed by Ella Soto to limit information about the patient's condition to family members. He'd had no reason to doubt her identity. The woman I knew as Ella Soto was knowledgeable about Mr. Soto's medical history and seemed genuinely concerned about his welfare, Dr. Patterson said. "I never suspected she wasn't his biological daughter." On the final day of testimony, the prosecution called Dad to the stand. I held my breath as they wheeled him into the courtroom. His dementia had progressed in the months since Ella's arrest, but his doctors said he had periods of clarity, especially about recent traumatic events. "Mr. Soto," Ms. Rodriguez said gently, "do you recognize the defendant, Ella Preston?" Dad looked across the courtroom at Ella, and his face hardened. "She said she was my daughter, but my daughter is Tracy." He pointed at me. "That woman lied to me for years." Do you remember what happened the night you collapsed at the memory care facility? She came to visit, said she had something to help me sleep. Then that young man gave me a shot, and everything went dark. When I woke up, I couldn't breathe. Ella's lawyer tried to discredit Dad's testimony, suggesting his dementia made his memory unreliable. But Dad's recall of that night was crystal clear. I may forget what I had for breakfast, Dad said firmly, but I remember the woman who tried to kill me. During closing arguments, Ms. Rodriguez was devastating. Ella Preston didn't just steal money. She stole 5 years of a father-daughter relationship. She stole Mr. Soto's autonomy, his dignity, and nearly his life. She manipulated caregivers, forged documents, and when her lies finally caught up to her, she attempted murder to cover her tracks. Ella's lawyer made one final plea. My client may have made mistakes, but they came from a place of genuine care. She devoted her life to helping a man who had no one else. He had someone else, Ms. Rodriguez countered. He had his real daughter. Ella Preston just made sure they never knew it. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. I watched Ella's face crumble as the verdict was read. For a moment, she looked like the woman I'd thought I knew. Vulnerable, broken, human. But then I remembered Dad lying in that hospital bed, fighting for his life because of her choices. At sentencing 2 weeks later, I was given the chance to make a victim impact statement. I stood up slowly, looking at the woman who had stolen 5 years of my father's life and nearly taken his future entirely. Ella, I said, my voice steady despite the tears in my eyes. I trusted you. My father trusted you. We welcomed you into our family, and you used that trust to destroy everything we had. She finally looked up at me, and I saw tears on her cheeks. You didn't just steal money. You stole time. You stole memories. You stole the chance for me to be there for my father when he needed me most. And when your lies started to unravel, you tried to steal his life. The judge sentenced her to 15 years in prison. As the bailiff led her away, Ella turned back one final time. I'm sorry, Tracy, she whispered. I really did love him. Love doesn't try to kill someone, I replied. Outside the courthouse, Ms. Rodriguez shook my hand. Justice was served today. Was it? I asked, watching the prison transport drive away. 15 years won't give me back the time I lost with my father. No, she said softly, but it ensures she can't hurt anyone else. As I drove to the memory care facility to tell Dad about the verdict, I thought about forgiveness, about justice, about the price of lies. Ella would spend the next 15 years in prison, but the damage she'd done would last forever. Some wounds, I realized, never fully heal. They just teach us to be stronger. 6 months after Ella's sentencing, I stood in Dad's room at Sunrise Memory Care, watching him work on a jigsaw puzzle. His hands moved slowly but deliberately, fitting pieces together with the patience that dementia sometimes brings. Tracy, he said, looking up at me with clear eyes. You came to visit. I come every day, Dad. I sat beside him, something I'd been doing religiously since the trial ended. How are you feeling today? Better, clearer. He set down a puzzle piece and took my hand. I remember what happened with that woman, Ella. The name still sent a chill through me, but I'd learned to face it without flinching. She can't hurt us anymore, Dad. She's in prison. Good. His grip tightened slightly. But I'm sorry, mija. Sorry you had to go through all that alone. Those words meant everything to me. In his lucid moments, Dad understood what we'd both lost during those 5 years. The conversations we'd never had. The memories we'd never made. the simple comfort of knowing we had each other. Dr. Martinez had explained that while Dad's dementia would continue to progress, the trauma of Ella's betrayal had actually triggered some improvements in his short-term memory. His brain seemed to be fighting to hold on to the people and events that mattered most. "I've been thinking," Dad said, returning to his puzzle, "about the trust, the money. The family trust that Ella had known about but hidden from us was now fully under my control. Nearly $2 million that should have been supporting Dad's care and securing both our futures. Instead, it had sat untouched while I struggled to pay his medical bills, and Ella systematically stole from his other accounts." "What about it?" I asked gently. "I want to do something good with it, something that would have made your mother proud." My heart swelled. Even with his cognitive decline, Dad was still thinking of others. "What did you have in mind?" "A scholarship. For nursing students, like the ones who take care of me here." He gestured around the room. "The good ones. The ones who see us as people, not just patients." I squeezed his hand. "I think that's perfect, Dad." Over the past months, I'd come to understand the difference between the staff members who genuinely cared and those who were just doing a job. Nurses like Maria, who remembered Dad's favorite songs and always spoke to him with dignity. Aides like James, who took extra time to make sure Dad felt comfortable and safe. "We'll call it the Elena Soto Memorial Scholarship," I said, naming it after my mother. "Mom would love knowing she's helping people who care for others." Dad smiled, and for a moment, he looked exactly like the father I remembered from my childhood. Strong, generous, full of love for his family. The legal aftermath of Ella's crimes had been complex, but ultimately successful. The district attorney's office had worked tirelessly to recover as much of the stolen money as possible. Between the funds in the accounts she'd opened and the property she'd purchased with Dad's money, we'd recovered about $400,000. It wasn't everything she'd stolen, but it was enough to secure Dad's care and give us both some financial stability. More importantly, it represented justice, tangible proof that her crimes hadn't gone unpunished. Ms. Rodriguez had become more than just our prosecutor. She'd become a friend. She checked in regularly, helping me navigate the complex process of becoming Dad's legal guardian and managing his affairs. "You've shown incredible strength through all of this," she'd told me just last week. "Your father is lucky to have you." "I'm the lucky one," I'd replied. "I got him back." And that was the truth that sustained me through the difficult days. Despite everything Ella had stolen, despite all the years we'd lost, I had my father back. Not the way he used to be. Dementia had taken too much for that, but in the ways that mattered most. The memory care facility had become a second home to me. I'd gotten to know the other families, the staff, the rhythms of the place. I'd learned that healing doesn't always look like getting everything back. Sometimes it looks like finding peace with what remains. I'd also started volunteering with an organization that helped families navigate elder care fraud. My experience with Ella had taught me how easily these crimes could happen, how predators targeted vulnerable elderly people and their families. The hardest part, I often told the support groups I now facilitated, isn't the money they steal. It's the trust they destroy, the relationships they poison, the time they take away. But I'd also learned something else. Resilience was possible. Love could survive betrayal. Families could heal, even when the wounds seemed too deep. Every evening after visiting Dad, I'd drive to my new apartment, a small but comfortable place I'd been able to afford thanks to recovering some of the stolen funds. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Clean, safe, and filled with photos of Dad and me from before his illness progressed. I'd started therapy too, working through the complex emotions of betrayal, guilt, and grief. Dr. Chen had helped me understand that my anger at Ella was valid, but so was my need to eventually let it go. Holding on to anger is like holding on to poison, she'd said during one of our sessions. It hurts you more than the person who wronged you. I wasn't ready to forgive Ella, might never be ready, but I was learning to release the rage that had consumed me for months after her arrest. Instead, I focused on gratitude. Gratitude that Dad had survived. Gratitude that the truth had come to light. Gratitude for the time we had left together. Tonight, as I prepared to leave Dad's room, he looked up from his puzzle with surprising clarity. "Tracy, I need to tell you something." "What is it, Dad?" "I'm proud of you, for fighting for us, for not giving up when everything looked hopeless." His eyes filled with tears. "You saved my life." "Dad, you don't need to—" "Yes, I do." He set down the puzzle piece and took both my hands in his. "From that night, when I couldn't breathe, when I thought I was dying, I heard your voice. You were talking to the doctors, demanding they help me. You fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself." The memory of that terrible night came flooding back. The chaos in the hospital room. The machines beeping frantically. My desperate pleas for the medical team to do something, anything, to save him. "You're my daughter," he continued. "My real daughter. And you proved it when it mattered most." Those words broke something loose in my chest. A knot of pain and guilt I'd been carrying for months. I'd spent so much time blaming myself for not being there during those 5 lost years, for not seeing through Ella's deception sooner. But Dad was right. When it truly mattered, when his life hung in the balance, I'd been exactly where I needed to be, fighting for him, refusing to give up, being his daughter in every way that counted. "I love you, Dad," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "I love you too, Misha, more than you'll ever know." As I drove home that night, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment. The devastating discovery of Ella's betrayal. The nightmare of watching Dad fight for his life. The long months of legal battles and emotional healing. It hadn't been the story I would have chosen for us, but it had taught me things I never could have learned otherwise. About my own strength, about the power of truth, about the unbreakable bond between a father and daughter. Ella was serving her 15-year sentence, and I'd heard through Ms. Rodriguez that she'd been placed in protective custody after receiving threats from other inmates who despised crimes against the elderly. Part of me felt a flicker of sympathy for her, but mostly I felt nothing. She'd made her choices, and now she was living with the consequences. The Elena Soto Memorial Scholarship was becoming a reality. I'd worked with the local nursing school to establish the criteria and funding structure. The first scholarships would be awarded next fall to students who demonstrated both academic excellence and genuine compassion for elderly patients. "Your mother would be so proud," Dad had said when I told him about the scholarship recipients we'd selected. She always said the best way to honor the dead was to help the living. That wisdom had become my guiding principle. Instead of dwelling on what Ella had stolen from us, I focused on what we could give to others. Instead of letting bitterness consume me, I chose to build something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. I'd also reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during Dad's illness and the chaos of Ella's deception. They'd rallied around me during the trial, offering support and reminding me that I wasn't alone in this fight. My cousin Maria had flown in from Chicago for the sentencing, and we'd spent hours talking about family, memory, and healing. "Tia Elena always said you were the strongest of all of us," she'd told me. "She'd be so proud of how you fought for Tio Carlos." Those connections to my extended family had become precious to me. They remembered Dad before his illness, and they helped keep those memories alive for both of us. As I unlocked my apartment door, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. The woman staring back at me looked different from the one who'd first walked into that memory care facility 18 months ago. Older, yes, but also stronger, more confident, tempered by trial, but not broken by it. I'd learned that survival wasn't just about making it through the worst moments. It was about finding ways to thrive afterward. It was about taking the lessons learned in darkness and using them to create light for others. The next morning brought a phone call from Ms. Rodriguez. "Tracy, I have news about Ella's restitution payments. The court has approved the sale of the last property she purchased with your father's money. You should receive another check within the next few weeks." "Thank you," I said. "That money will go straight into Dad's care fund and the scholarship program." "You're remarkable, you know that?" Ms. Rodriguez said. "Most people would want to use that money for themselves after everything you've been through." "I learned something from all this," I replied. "Money can't buy back lost time, but it can be used to create something meaningful for the future." That afternoon, I sat with Dad in the facility's garden. He was having one of his clearer days, and we talked about Mom, about his childhood, about dreams for the scholarship program. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Ella had succeeded?" he asked quietly. I'd thought about that question many times. If the DNR had been honored, if the medical team hadn't fought to save him, if I'd never discovered the truth about who she really was. "Sometimes," I admitted, "but then I remember that we're here now, together, and that's what matters." "I'm glad you found me," Dad said, reaching for my hand. "I'm glad you fought to stay," I replied. As the sun set over the garden, I thought about forgiveness, justice, and the long road to healing. Ella's betrayal had nearly destroyed our family, but it had also revealed strengths I never knew I possessed. It had brought Dad and me closer together in ways that might never have happened otherwise. I couldn't forgive her. Not yet, maybe not ever. But I could choose to build something beautiful from the ruins she'd left behind. The scholarship program, the advocacy work, the deeper relationship with Dad, the connections to my extended family. These were the gifts that had emerged from the ashes of betrayal. Not the gifts I would have chosen, but gifts nonetheless. "Ready to go inside?" I asked Dad as the evening air grew cool. "In a minute," he said, looking up at the stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Your mother used to say that the stars were reminders that light can shine even in the darkest places." She was right, I whispered, squeezing his hand. "She usually was," Dad said with a smile. As we made our way back inside, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine peace. Not the absence of problems or pain, but the deep satisfaction of knowing I'd fought for what mattered most and won. Ella had tried to steal our family, our future, our very lives, but she'd failed in the most important way possible. Dad was alive. We were together, and we were building something meaningful from everything we'd endured. That night, as I prepared for bed, I looked at a photo on my nightstand, Dad and me at my college graduation, both of us beaming with pride and love. That photo had gotten me through the darkest moments of the past year, reminding me of who we really were beneath all the pain and betrayal. Tomorrow, I would visit Dad again. We would work on puzzles, talk about Mom, and plan the next scholarship recipient announcement. It would be another day in our new normal, not the life we'd planned, but a life filled with purpose and love nonetheless. What gave me strength to move on? The same thing that had always sustained me, the unbreakable bond between a father and daughter. The knowledge that love, real love, survives even the deepest betrayals. Some stories don't end with everything being perfect. They end with everything being real. And sometimes that's the most beautiful ending of all.